And joining us now, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, who just returned from Ukraine this week and knows a lot about women in politics and in operating at the highest levels of government and diplomacy. So I want to ask you about Ukraine, but first, you know Jacinda Ardern and her decision to step down. Do you see this as a setback for this new generation of younger women leaders?
I actually see it as an affirmation of this new generation of younger leaders. I've had the pleasure of knowing the Prime Minister for quite some time. When I was at the Harvard Kennedy School, she joined me for a wonderful conversation about her own evolution. And then as Deputy Secretary, I've been able to meet with her in New Zealand. She's an extraordinary woman. She knows she's going to have many chapters in her life. And I think you heard it all in the clips that you just did. This is a person who understands kindness and empathy, but also strength and power.
Well, to that point, you certainly illustrate that. You've just come back Tuesday night from Ukraine. And, of course, the terrible either accident or the crash, we don't know the cause, really, that took the life of the Interior Minister, his deputy, and so many others, and children on the ground. Here, we're at a critical point, an inflection point. There is going to be a new arms package announced tomorrow. We know that Secretary Austin is there now meeting with fellow ministers, defense ministers. The Germans are balking at sending their Leopard 2 tanks unless the U.S. sends its M1 Abrams tank. And they know that the Abrams tank, by everyone I've talked to and our experts, is just not useful there. It's too complicated. It takes too much training, the maintenance, the fuel, all of that. So why is Germany holding back and not letting Poland send the tanks, which Germany has to approve because they manufacture those tanks?
Yeah. So, Andrea, as part of this trip to Ukraine, I was along with Dr. Colin Kahl from our Defense Department and John Feiner, the Deputy National Security Advisor, because we wanted to show that we were one government, whole of government support for Ukraine. And we went to Germany and to Poland first to look at our security assistance and how we're providing that and all of the accountability measures that are so important to all of us as well, and really understood exactly the point you made. Each weapon system has to be thought about very carefully. Will it get the job done? How long will it take to train people on it? Can we sustain it in terms of repairs and its being able to operate in the field in this instance? And the President Biden's been very clear, as has Secretary Blinken. Every country has to make its own decisions. We just hope that everyone will do everything they possibly can to support Ukraine. I met with young people, along with every government official, including President Zelensky in Ukraine. And I think one young woman, when I met with youth leaders, summed it up. Being in Ukraine is both devastating and inspiring.
Well, the President Biden has spoken this week to Chancellor Scholz, as well as just 2 weeks ago. After two calls with the Chancellor, I know we want to present a united front against Vladimir Putin and support of Zelensky. Is there anything more that the U.S. can do to give President Zelensky more leverage, more diplomatic, more leverage on the battlefield, which will help him eventually with diplomacy, which is the only end game here?
Yeah. So I think that there's an enormous amount being done by more than 50 countries around the world. And I think that what you pointed out at the beginning of this, that Secretary Austin is in Germany. He's having a contact group meeting tomorrow with colleagues to talk about where we are, where we're going. There have been reports about how we are working with Ukrainians to think about the time ahead and how we can support them. At every point in this process, we have listened very hard to what the Ukrainians have asked for, and we have tried to think about that security assistance for that moment in time. So this is an evolution as the battlefield changes, and President Biden and the United States Congress have been enormously supportive and responsive. And I want to thank Congress for incredibly strong bipartisan support when it comes to making sure that Ukraine gets everything it needs to prosecute this premeditated and outrageous and unprovoked invasion of another sovereign country by Vladimir Putin.
of course, the criticism has been by some that we've given them not everything they want, but a lot, $25 billion, but that it's too long in coming. To quote the Foreign Secretary of the UK, saying, we need to do it further and faster. The New York Times is reporting that the U.S. is warming to the idea of helping Ukraine target Russian encampments, which, very large in Crimea. Since we say Crimea is part of Ukraine, even though it was taken over in 2014, why not give them what they need to go after the Russians where they are rebasing and where they are attacking from in Crimea?
As I said, Andrea, this is a constant conversation with our military, with our partners and allies around the world in this venture and support for a sovereign country to ensure that it has its territory, its sovereignty, and able to make its own political choices. And we will continue to have these discussions with Ukraine and give them everything that we possibly can to prosecute and prevail in this very, very difficult situation. As you point out, ultimately, as President Zelensky himself has said, there needs to be a just peace. And that's something that I think the whole world wants to see happen here.
Well, interestingly, you're not ruling it out. Obviously, you're not going to preempt whatever the secretary announces or the president announces in this evolving situation. Just very quickly, do you know anything more about that horrific helicopter crash in terms of the cause? Although the President Zelensky has said just the war itself, that the fact that they had to fly so low to avoid, Russian fire, he blames the Russians in any case.
Well, I think President Zelensky's comments are completely understandable. Because of the war, the situation is so horrifying. Changes have to be made in transportation patterns that even if this turns out to have been an accident, the war has created an environment and a set of circumstances that makes everything very difficult. One can feel that inside of Ukraine. People have a tough road ahead. We need to help them in every way we possibly can.
Secretary of State, Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman, thank you so much. Glad to see you off a plane for at least a day.
Thank you.